There are people who simply cannot be moved. You have seen them. Someone tries to guilt them, and the guilt does not land. Someone applies pressure, and they stay exactly where they are. Someone delivers a carefully constructed narrative designed to make them doubt themselves, and they listen, consider it briefly, and then remain unchanged. They do not argue. They do not get defensive. They do not perform a show of being unbothered. They are just genuinely not bothered, and the person trying to move them eventually gives up, because there is nowhere to get purchase, no lever that works, no angle that produces the desired result. These people exist. You have encountered them. Maybe you have envied them. Maybe you have wondered what they know that you do not, because you have been on the other side. You've been in a conversation and felt yourself being pulled somewhere you did not choose to go. You have agreed to something and not known quite how the agreement happened. You have walked away from an interaction feeling worse about yourself than when you entered it, with no clear understanding of what just happened. You have found yourself defending a position you did not originally hold. You have felt the slow, creeping confusion of someone who is being moved without being able to identify the hand that is moving them. That feeling has a name. It is the feeling of being manipulated, and it is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of a very specific gap, a gap between what is happening and what you understand about what is happening. Closing that gap is what makes a person hard to manipulate, not toughness, not coldness, not suspicion of everyone. Understanding, specific, clear, honest understanding of the mechanics of influence and the particular vulnerabilities that make a person susceptible to them. That understanding is what this is about. Here is the first thing you need to understand. Manipulation is not rare. It is not something that only happens in dramatic relationships with obviously toxic people. It is a feature of ordinary human interaction, not always conscious, not always malicious, but present. Because influence is something every human being attempts, we all try to shape how others see us, how they feel about us, what they decide to do. The line between influence and manipulation is not always clean, but here is the clearest way to draw it. Influence works by giving you accurate information and allowing you to make a genuine choice. Manipulation works by distorting your perception, exploiting your emotions, or targeting your specific vulnerabilities to produce a specific outcome that serves the manipulator, regardless of whether it serves you. Influence respects your agency. Manipulation bypasses it. Influence says, "Here is what I think. Here is why. What do you think?" Manipulation says, "Here is the version of reality I need you to accept, and here is the lever I am going to pull until you accept it." The lever is always something real. Your desire to be loved, your fear of conflict, your need for approval, your guilt about not doing enough, your insecurity about your own judgment, your desire to be seen as a good person. These are real things, human things, not weaknesses in the sense of flaws. They are entry points, and the person who knows your entry points and is willing to use them has a significant advantage over the person who does not know they have entry points at all. But here is what you are missing about why some people are so much harder to manipulate than others. It is not that they do not have entry points. Everyone has entry points. The desire for connection, the discomfort of disapproval, the pull of guilt, the need to feel good about yourself. These are human. They do not disappear in the hard-to-manipulate person. What is different is that the hard-to-manipulate person knows their entry points. They have done the honest work of examining their own specific vulnerabilities, their specific emotional needs, their specific fears and insecurities in places where their judgment tends to cloud. And because they know these things about themselves, the manipulator cannot use them as levers without the person seeing exactly what is happening. The guilt trip lands, and the hard-to-manipulate person thinks, "That is a guilt trip. Let me assess whether I have actually done anything worth feeling guilty about." The pressure arrives and they think, "That is pressure. Let me assess whether the position I am being pressured away from is one I actually want to change." The narrative is constructed and they think, "That is a constructed narrative. Let me assess what is actually true here versus what is being implied." The recognition does not make them immune, but it creates a gap between the tactic and the response. And in that gap, the choice is real, rather than the automatic response the tactic was designed to produce. Here is where it gets really specific, because there are specific tactics that work most reliably on most people, and understanding them is the most direct path to becoming resistant to them. The first is the guilt escalation. Guilt is one of the most powerful levers available because it is connected to something genuinely good in most people: the desire to do right by the people in their lives, the care about whether they have caused harm, the discomfort of knowing that someone is hurt because of something they did. These are not weaknesses, they are indicators of a functioning conscience. The manipulation of guilt works by attaching it to things that do not actually warrant it. The person who creates guilt in you for having limits, for saying no, for prioritizing your own needs, for not giving more than you have to give, for making a decision that did not prioritize them. The language of this manipulation is recognizable once you know what to listen for. "After everything I have done for you, I guess I just do not matter to you. You have really hurt me with this. I cannot believe you would do this." These statements are designed to activate the conscience in a way that bypasses the evaluation of whether the conscience actually has anything to respond to. The hard-to-manipulate person, when guilt arrives, does not immediately accept it. They ask the question the manipulation is designed to prevent. Have I actually done something wrong here? Not whether the other person feels hurt. Feelings are real, but they are not evidence whether there is a genuine ethical failure on their part. If yes, the guilt is information and worth responding to. If no, the guilt is a tactic, and tactics do not require compliance. They require recognition. The second tactic is the reality distortion. This is more subtle and in some ways more damaging. It works by slowly, persistently, selectively presenting information in a way that moves your perception of reality toward a version that serves the manipulator. It rarely arrives dramatically. It arrives incrementally. A comment here about how you tend to overreact. An observation there about how you are too sensitive. A reminder of the time you were wrong about something. A pattern of minimizing your perceptions and amplifying theirs. A consistent emphasis on your failures and a consistent minimization of your strengths. Over time, if this runs long enough and consistently enough, the target begins to question their own perception, to wonder if they really are overreacting, to second-guess the thing they were confident about, to give more weight to the other person's version of events than to their own direct experience. This is called gaslighting when it is intentional, but it can run in less intentional forms too. In relationships where one person consistently positions themselves as the authority on what is real, where one person's emotional reality is routinely treated as more valid than the other's, where the pattern of the interaction trains one person to trust themselves less. The protection against reality distortion is a stable relationship with your own perception, not the conviction that you are always right, the willingness to hold your own experience as real and valid even when someone else is telling you it is not, the ability to say, "I hear your version. I am going to think about it, but I am also going to hold on to mine until the thinking is done." Not defensive, not closed, grounded in your own experience as a legitimate data point that does not disappear just because someone else finds it inconvenient. The third tactic is the intermittent reward, and this one operates at the neurological level. The intermittent reward is the slot machine principle applied to relationships. The unpredictable delivery of warmth, the inconsistent availability of approval, the random alternation between closeness and withdrawal. This produces something specific in the nervous system, an intense focus on the relationship, a heightened anxiety about the state of the connection, a preoccupation with reading the other person's signals, an investment in the relationship that far exceeds what the actual returns warrant. Because the brain, in the presence of unpredictable reward, increases its pursuit behavior. The warmth that arrives unpredictably is more compelling than the warmth that arrives reliably. Not because it is more real, because the unpredictability keeps the nervous system in a state of elevated engagement with the source. The hard-to-manipulate person recognizes this pattern not just in others, but in themselves. They notice when they are working much harder for someone's approval than the relationship warrants, when the anxiety about someone's mood is disproportionate to what the relationship actually is, when the preoccupation with one person's perception of them is crowding out everything else. These are signs that an intermittent reward dynamic is running, and recognizing it is what breaks the spell, because the spell requires not seeing it. Here is the midpoint truth. The hardest people to manipulate are not the people who trust no one. They are the people who trust themselves. That is the actual distinction, not suspicion, not cynicism, not a defensive posture toward the world that keeps everyone at arm's length. Self-trust, a stable, clear, honest relationship with their own perceptions, their own values, their own assessment of situations. Here is why self-trust is the foundation of manipulation resistance. Most manipulation works by inserting doubt. Doubt about your perception. Doubt about your judgment. Doubt about your judgment. Doubt about whether what you are sensing is real. Doubt about whether your feelings are appropriate. Doubt about whether your assessment of the situation is accurate. The moment the doubt enters, the person becomes vulnerable to the alternative version of reality the manipulator is offering. Because if you are not sure what is real, you become dependent on the other person's certainty, and their certainty is calibrated to serve their agenda. The person who trusts themselves, who can receive information and sit with doubt and still not lose the thread back to their own perception, cannot be moved by doubt insertion. Not because they are arrogant, not because they think they are always right, because they have a stable enough relationship with their own inner life that someone else's version of reality does not automatically override their own. They consider, they remain open, they genuinely examine whether the critique has merit, and then they return to their own perception rather than abandoning it. Let us talk about the specific emotional vulnerabilities that manipulators find and use, not to shame anyone for having them. Everyone has them, but to make the invisible visible. Because vulnerabilities that are invisible cannot be protected. The first is the need for approval. If your emotional stability is significantly dependent on other people's approval of you, you are holding a lever that anyone who knows you is capable of using. Withholding approval produces anxiety. Threatening to withdraw it produces compliance. Offering it conditionally produces effort to meet the condition. The protection is not to stop wanting approval. The protection is to build an internal source of it that does not require external delivery to function. The person who has a stable sense of their own worth that does not require constant external confirmation is much less responsive to the withdrawal or threat of approval. It still stings, it still matters, but it does not destabilize. And the person who cannot be destabilized by approval withdrawal is a person the approval manipulation does not work on. The person who will do almost anything to avoid conflict is someone who can be consistently positioned into situations that do not serve them, because the manipulator simply has to make the alternative to compliance feel like conflict, and the conflict-averse person, to avoid the conflict, accepts the position again and again, not because they were tricked, because the threat of conflict was more uncomfortable than the cost of compliance. The protection is not becoming someone who enjoys conflict. The protection is building a tolerance for the discomfort of conflict that makes it a manageable experience rather than an emergency. The person who can sit with the discomfort of someone being unhappy with them, who does not have to immediately resolve that discomfort through capitulation, is a person the conflict manipulation does not consistently work on. Not because they are immune, because they can tolerate the discomfort long enough to assess whether the capitulation is actually warranted, and most of the time it is not. The third vulnerability is the desire to be a good person. This one is the most insidious because it weaponizes something genuinely valuable. The person who cares about being ethical, kind, fair, and considerate is someone who can be moved by implications that they are failing to be those things. The manipulation says, "A good person would do this." The manipulation says, "If you actually cared, you would do what I am asking." The manipulation says, "The reason you are not agreeing is that you are being selfish." And the person who cares about being good, who takes their own ethical standards seriously, feels the pull, because the alternative, being someone who is not good, is genuinely aversive to them. The protection is the distinction between genuine ethical failure and the performance of goodness demanded by someone who is using your ethics against you. A good person is not someone who does whatever they are asked in the name of being good. A good person has values that sometimes require disappointing people, that sometimes require saying no to things presented as deserving of yes, that sometimes require holding a position in the face of pressure to abandon it. Goodness is not compliance, and the person who has clarified this distinction for themselves cannot be moved as easily by the implication that refusing to comply makes them a bad person. Here is something about the specific context where manipulation most often runs: close relationships, not with strangers, not with people who have no access to your interior life, with the people who know you, who know your insecurities, your fears, your history, the specific things that make you feel guilty or ashamed or not good enough, because manipulation requires access, and intimacy provides access. This is one of the reasons manipulation in close relationships is so damaging and so difficult to see clearly, because the access was given freely, as an act of trust, in the belief that the knowledge of your interior would be held with care. And when that knowledge is used as a lever instead, there is a specific quality of violation, not just the manipulation itself, but the betrayal of the intimacy that made it possible. The hard-to-manipulate person in close relationships is not someone who withholds access. They are someone who has enough self-knowledge that the access does not create unlimited leverage, because they know their vulnerabilities before someone else can use them, because they have already done the work of examining the insecurity, the fear, the need that could be targeted, not to eliminate it, to understand it clearly enough that when it is being targeted, they can see it happening. Now let us talk about what manipulation resistance actually looks like in practice. In the actual moments when pressure is being applied, the first thing that changes is the quality of the pause. The hard-to-manipulate person does not respond to pressure immediately. They pause, not dramatically, not as a performance of being unbothered, as a genuine internal practice of assessment before response. The pressure arrives, the emotional activation arrives, the pull toward a specific response arrives, and instead of following the pull, they pause, not for a long time necessarily, but long enough to ask, what is actually happening here? What is being asked of me? Is this a request or a demand? What happens if I do not comply? Is the cost they are implying real or constructed? Does this serve both of us or only one of us? What would I think about this if the emotional activation were not present? Those questions are not complex, but they require space, and space requires the pause. The manipulative dynamic is almost always designed to prevent the pause, to create urgency, to raise emotional stakes, to make the delay between pressure and response feel like an unacceptable gap, because the pause is where the manipulation stops working. The person who can pause, who can sit with the urgency without acting from it, is the person the urgency-creating tactic does not work on. The second thing that changes is the relationship with certainty. Manipulation frequently presents itself as certainty. This is what happened. This is what you did. This is what it means. This is what a reasonable person would do in this situation. The certainty is designed to make your uncertainty feel like a liability. If they are sure and you are unsure, the implication is that their version is more valid. The hard-to-manipulate person has a different relationship with certainty. They do not need to be certain to hold their position. They can say, "I am not sure. I need more time to think about this. I am not going to make a decision under this kind of pressure." And they can say this without feeling like the uncertainty proves the other person right. Uncertainty is not weakness. Uncertainty is the honest acknowledgement of incomplete information. And incomplete information is exactly what most manipulation is designed to exploit. The person who is comfortable saying, "I do not know yet," and holding that position under pressure is a person who cannot be rushed into a conclusion they have not reached themselves. The third thing that changes is the response to emotional manipulation specifically. Emotional manipulation works by generating an emotional state designed to produce compliance. Guilt, fear, shame, anxiety about the relationship, the specific distress of feeling like a bad person, and then offering compliance as the resolution of the emotional state. Do the thing I am asking and the guilt will go away. Agree with my version and the tension will resolve. Give me what I want and the relationship will feel safe again. The hard-to-manipulate person notices the structure of this offer. They notice that the emotional distress arrived in close proximity to a specific request, that the resolution of the distress is tied to compliance with that request, that the distress has been constructed rather than occurring naturally. Not always. Sometimes distress in a relationship is real and not manipulative. The person also knows this. The distinction is whether the distress is being used to coerce a specific outcome. If yes, the appropriate response is not to resolve the distress through compliance. It is to address the distress directly. "I can see you are upset. I want to understand what is actually happening for you. But I am not going to make a decision based on the distress alone." That response decouples the emotional state from the compliance being requested, and decoupling is the most direct disruption of the structure manipulation relies on. Here is something about the physical experience of being manipulated. Because the body often knows before the mind does, there is a specific physical experience that accompanies the moment manipulation is occurring. A tightening somewhere. A quality of confusion that is different from normal confusion. A sense of being slightly off balance. Of the ground shifting, of trying to track something that keeps moving. A resistance somewhere quiet that is saying, something is not right here. Most people override this signal because they have learned to privilege explicit language over implicit feeling, because the person in front of them seems sincere and their discomfort seems rude or paranoid, because the social pressure to accept the offered version of reality is more immediate than the quiet internal signal saying, "Wait." The hard-to-manipulate person has learned to take the signal seriously, not as proof of anything, as information worth attending to. The signal does not mean this person is definitely manipulating you. It means something in this interaction warrants closer examination before you proceed, and that examination taken seriously is often enough Because manipulation depends on not being examined, on moving fast enough that the examination does not happen. The signal that slows you down is the signal that saves you. Let us talk about the specific kind of person who is most consistently difficult to manipulate, not the armored person, not the person who keeps everyone at a distance, not the suspicious person who enters every interaction braced for deception, the grounded person. Here is what grounded means in this specific context. It means they know what they think. They have done enough honest self-examination to have a clear sense of their own values, their own perceptions, their own version of what is happening in a given situation, not certainty, clarity. The difference is important. Certainty says, I am right. Clarity says, I know what I think and I know why I think it, and I am willing to update that if I receive genuinely compelling information. The grounded person can be presented with a counterargument. They can genuinely consider it. They can be moved by actual evidence, but they cannot be moved by pressure, urgency, guilt, or emotional manipulation, because those things are not evidence. They are leverage. And a person with clarity about their own thinking can feel the difference between being genuinely persuaded and being leveraged. Persuasion leaves them feeling like they reached a conclusion. Manipulation leaves them feeling like they were moved to a conclusion they did not choose. The grounded person notices the difference, and notices it early enough to stop going where they did not decide to go. Here's what nobody tells you about becoming hard to manipulate. It requires becoming honest with yourself first. This is the piece most people skip, because examining your own vulnerabilities is uncomfortable, because looking honestly at your need for approval or your fear of conflict or the places where your self-worth is genuinely uncertain requires a level of self-examination that feels threatening. It feels threatening because it means acknowledging something you would rather not acknowledge. That there are ways in which you are not as solid as you would like to appear. That there are levers, and you know where some of them are. That certain people, certain dynamics, certain emotional experiences reliably move you in ways you cannot fully control. But here is what the honest self-examination provides that nothing else can. It takes the lever away from the external world and puts it in your own hands. The vulnerability that is seen is a vulnerability that can be worked with. The fear of conflict that is honestly acknowledged is a fear you can consciously manage. The need for approval that is named is a need you can consciously meet in ways that do not depend on other people's provision. The insecurity that is examined honestly is an insecurity that loses some of its power to be activated from outside, because activation from outside requires the target not to see it coming, and you see it coming because you already knew it was there. Here is the last thing, the thing that holds everything together. The people who are genuinely hard to manipulate are not just self-aware, they are free. Free from the need to be seen in a particular way. Free from the requirement that other people approve of them. Free from the urgency of resolving discomfort immediately. Free from the belief that someone else's emotional state is their responsibility to fix. That freedom is not coldness. Genuinely hard to manipulate people are often deeply warm, deeply caring, genuinely interested in the people around them. But their warmth does not come with hooks. It does not require reciprocation in a specific form. It does not produce obligation. It does not collapse when it is not returned. They give because they want to give. They help because they genuinely want to help. They stay because they genuinely want to be there. And when they stop wanting to, they say so, not with drama, not with apology, with the simple honesty of a person who does not need permission to exist on their own terms. That freedom is what makes manipulation impossible. Because manipulation works by finding what you need and withholding it until you comply. But you cannot withhold from someone what they have already built inside themselves. You cannot threaten someone with the loss of something they have found another way to hold. You cannot destabilize someone whose stability does not depend on you. That is the psychology of the person who is hard to manipulate. Not armor, not suspicion, not toughness. Freedom, built from the inside, from self-knowledge, from clarity about their own values and perceptions, from a stable sense of their own worth that does not require external delivery. From the practiced ability to pause, to assess, to recognize a lever and choose not to be pulled by it. That freedom is not given. It is built. One honest look at yourself at a time, one pause before the automatic response at a time, one moment of trusting your own perception in the face of pressure to abandon it at a time, until the freedom becomes the default, and the manipulation, finding nothing to grip, slides off, and the person doing the manipulating moves on to find someone who has not yet built what you have built, but that person is no longer you.